Greetings, this is Darkmaster491, and today I'm showcasing my Weakness Policy Orbeetle in some Series 8 ranked double battles. Here's the team that I'll be using along with the rental code, so you can try out this team for yourself. I made timestamps for this video as usual, so if you want to skip ahead to the battles, you can click on any of the timestamps which you can find in the description for this video. The main strategy of this team is to activate Orbeetle's weakness policy by having Tapu Lele use Fling on Orbeetle, or by having Whimsicott use U-Turn on Orbeetle, and to Gigantamax Orbeetle and have Orbeetle use G-Max Gravitas to set up the Gravity so that Groudon will be able to deal damage to flying type Pokemon and levitating Pokemon with Precipice Blades. Tapu Lele has the Pitaya Berry item, so when Tapu Lele flings the Pitaya Berry at Orbeetle, Orbeetle will receive a +1 boost to its special attack, and Fling will activate Orbeetle's weakness policy, which will give Orbeetle a +2 boost to its special attack, since Fling is a dark type attack, and Orbeetle is weak to dark type attacks, so Orbeetle will be at +3 special attack. If the opposing Pokemon are faster than Orbeetle, you'll want to have Whimsicott set up a Tailwind, and on the next turn, have Whimsicott use U-Turn on Orbeetle to activate its weakness policy, while switching out into either Tapu Lele or Groudon. Tapu Lele will provide Psychic Terrain support, which will increase the power of Psychic type attacks, and protect Orbeetle from priority attacks such as Sucker Punch and Prankster priority moves. Choice Band Groudon will deal big damage to both of the opposing Pokemon with Precipice Blades. Just make sure to Gigantamax Orbeetle and have it use G-Max Gravitas to set up the Gravity for Groudon. Gravity enables flying type Pokemon and Pokemon with the Levitate ability to be hit by ground type moves, so Groudon will be able to use Precipice Blades to deal damage to flying type Pokemon such as Landorus-Therian and levitating Pokemon such as Rotom-Wash while Gravity is in effect. Gravity also lowers all Pokemon's evasion by 2 stages, so moves like Precipice Blades and Hypnosis will become more accurate. Precipice Blades and Hypnosis actually become 100% accurate while Gravity is in effect, so after Orbeetle's Gigantamax turns end, Orbeetle can use Hypnosis to put an opposing Pokemon to sleep without having to worry about Hypnosis missing. Orbeetle also has the option to use Baton Pass to pass along its stat changes to another Pokemon. As for the rest of the team, Venusaur benefits from Groudon's Drought ability, since Venusaur's speed doubles while the Sun Weather is in effect thanks to its Chlorophyll ability, and Venusaur has the move Weather Ball, which becomes a Fire type attack while the Sun Weather is in effect. Glastrier does well under Trick Room, and Whimsicott can set up Trick Room for Glastrier. Anyways, I'll give a full team analysis for this team after the battles, so let's jump into the battles now. Alright, so my opponent is going to lead with Lapras and Incineroar, and I'm going to lead with my Orbeetle and my Tapu Lele. Tapu Lele's Psychic Surge ability will activate the Psychic Terrain, so Incineroar cannot use Fake Out while the Psychic Terrain is in effect. And this is perfect since I can have my Tapu Lele use Fling to activate my Orbeetle's weakness policy, and then my Orbeetle will deal big damage to the opposing Pokemon with Max Flutterby and G-Max Gravitas. Orbeetle's Frisk ability reveals the held items of the opposing Pokemon, Lapras has the Light Clay item, and the Incineroar has the Figgy Berry item. Incineroar is the bigger threat here, so I'm going to Gigantamax my Orbeetle and have it use Max Flutterby to deal big damage to the Incineroar while lowering Lapras' special attack. This is the most ideal situation since most Lapras are special attackers, so my Orbeetle can use Max Flutterby to knock out all of Lapras' partners while mitigating the damage that Lapras deals with its special attacks. My opponent is going to Gigantamax the Lapras, but Lapras isn't really a threat since I can just lower its special attack by having my Gigantamax Orbeetle use Max Flutterby. The Gigantamax Lapras will most likely use G-Max Resonance to set up the Aurora Veil, which will decrease the damage that the opposing Pokemon take from physical and special attacks. So my Tapu Lele is going to use Fling to fling its Pitaya Berry at my Orbeetle, which will give my Orbeetle a +1 boost to its special attack. And the Fling is also going to activate my Orbeetle's weakness policy, giving my Orbeetle a +2 boost to its special attack. So now my Orbeetle is at +3 special attack. And now my Gigantamax Orbeetle is going to pick up the KO onto the Incineroar with a Max Flutterby at +3 special attack, while lowering the Lapras' special attack by 1 stage. And I can pretty much ignore the Lapras for now, and have my Gigantamax Orbeetle keep on targeting the other Pokemon while lowering Lapras' special attack with Max Flutterby. The Lapras is going to use G-Max Resonance to set up the Aurora Veil, but it's not going to deal much damage to my Gigantamax Orbeetle since Lapras is at -1 special attack. The Aurora Veil is going to decrease the damage output from my Pokemon's physical and special attacks, but my Orbeetle is at +3 special attack, so it still has very strong damage output. I'm going to have my Tapu Lele use Taunt on the Necrozma Dust main to prevent it from setting up a potential Trick Room, and I'm going to have my Gigantamax Orbeetle target the Necrozma Dust main with a Max Flutterby. Max Flutterby will decrease Lapras' special attack once again, so the Lapras is at -2 special attack now. So this is pretty much a 2v1 situation since Lapras is not a threat to my Pokemon at this point. The Gigantamax Lapras is going to try to deal some damage to my Gigantamax Orbeetle with another G-Max Resonance, but it's only dealing chip damage at this point. And the Necrozma Dustmane was trying to set up the Trick Room as I expected, but my Tapu Lele stopped it with the Taunt. And my opponent is going to forfeit the battle since there's not much that they can do at this point. In this next battle, my opponent is going to lead with Rotom-Wash and Zygarde, while I'm going to lead with my Orbeetle and my Whimsicott. My Orbeetle's Frisk ability reveals that the Rotom-Wash is holding a Wiki Berry and the Zygarde has the Weakness Policy, so I'm expecting my opponent to Dynamax the Zygarde right away, expecting my Whimsicott to activate their Weakness Policy with a super effective Fairy type attack. But what my opponent doesn't understand is that the real plan is for my Whimsicott to activate my Weakness Policy. So I'm going to Gigantamax my Orbeetle and have my Whimsicott use U-turn on my Orbeetle to activate my Orbeetle's Weakness Policy and switch into Tapu Lele to set up the Psychic Terrain, which will increase the power of G-Max Gravitas. My opponent is going to Dynamax the Zygarde as I expected, so the Zygarde will be able to survive the attack from my Gigantamax Orbeetle, but it's still going to take a lot of damage from a G-Max Gravitas at +2 special attack with the additional power boost from the Psychic Terrain. So my Whimsicott will use U-turn on my Gigantamax Orbeetle, and that's going to activate my Weakness Policy, and my Orbeetle is going to get a +2 boost to its special attack, and my Whimsicott is going to switch out, and I'm going to send in my Tapu Lele, which will set up the Psychic Terrain, which will increase the damage output of G-Max Gravitas, since G-Max Gravitas is a Psychic type attack. And now my Gigantamax Orbeetle will deal big damage to the Dynamax Zygarde with a G-Max Gravitas at +2 special attack, boosted by the Psychic Terrain. The G-Max Gravitas will set up the Gravity, which will allow my Groudon to deal damage to the Rotom-Wash with its ground type attacks, and the Dynamax Zygarde is going to take out my Tapu Lele with a super effective Max Steel Spike. Max Steel Spike will give the Dynamax Zygarde and the Rotom-Wash a +1 boost to their defense, so it's going to be more difficult for my Groudon to deal damage to the opposing Pokemon, but Rotom-Wash shouldn't be too difficult to knock out since my Groudon is Choice Banded, and I've got the Gravity in effect. Rotom-Wash is an electric and water type Pokemon, and since the Gravity cancels out the Levitate ability, it's weak to ground type attacks. I've also got my Gigantamax Orbeetle, which can easily knock out the Rotom-Wash of its special attacks. The Dynamax Zygarde is going to transform into its complete form since Zygarde has less than 50% of its HP remaining, so it's going to get a lot of that HP back, making it more difficult for my Pokemon to knock out the Dynamax Zygarde. I'm going to send in my Groudon, and my opponent is going to switch out the Rotom-Wash and send in the Incineroar to intimidate my Groudon. So now my Groudon is at -1 attack. I'm going to have my Gigantamax Orbeetle target the Dynamax Zygarde with another G-Max Gravitas, since the Zygarde is the bigger threat right now. The Dynamax Zygarde is going to survive the attack since Zygarde Complete Form has so much HP, but now it's in KO range for another attack from my Gigantamax Orbeetle. The Incineroar has the Shuka Berry, which will reduce the damage for my Groudon's Precipice Blades, but another Precipice Blades will pick up the KO onto the Incineroar. The Dynamax Zygarde will use Max Whirlwind on my Gigantamax Orbeetle, which will also reduce my Groudon's attack by 1 stage, so now my Groudon is at -2 attack, but it should still be able to pick up the KO onto the Incineroar at the amount of HP it has left since my Groudon is Choice Banded, but my opponent is actually going to switch out the Incineroar and send in the Rotom-Wash, so maybe they forgot about the Gravity still being in effect. The Dynamax Zygarde is going to go for the Max Guard, which is a good play since I targeted the Dynamax Zygarde with the G-Max Gravitas, but I can always knock it out with the Bug Buzz or Expanding Force next turn. My Groudon is going to go for the Precipice Blades, which is going to deal super effective damage onto the Rotom-Wash since the Gravity is still in effect. Even though my Groudon is at -2 attack, it's still going to deal a lot of damage to the Rotom-Wash since my Groudon is Choice Banded. The Rotom-Wash will get some HP recovery from the Wiki Berry, but another Precipice Blades will pick up the KO onto the Rotom-Wash, and that's going to be the end of my Orbeetle's Gigantamax turns, as well as the end of the opposing Zygarde's Dynamax turns. My opponent is going to switch out the Zygarde and send in Incineroar, since they were expecting my Orbeetle to use a Psychic type attack into the Zygarde slot, but I'm going to predict that and have my Orbeetle use Bug Buzz into the Zygarde slot, and that's going to pick up the KO onto the Incineroar. The Intimidate is going to bring my Groudon down to -3 attack, but my Groudon will still be able to pick up the KO onto Rotom-Wash since it's now a single target choice banded Precipice Blades. So now it's 4v2, and there's not much that my opponent can do since the Zygarde is very low in health, and my Orbeetle can deal big damage to both of the opposing Pokemon with Expanding Force at +2 special attack. The Psychic Terrain is still in effect, and Expanding Force becomes a spread move in the Psychic Terrain, so my opponent cannot avoid the attack by using Ally Switch with Comfey, so their only option is to have Comfey use Floral Healing onto the Zygarde and hope that Zygarde can survive the attacks from my Orbeetle and my Groudon. Expanding Force is going to deal big damage to both of the opposing Pokemon, putting them both in KO range for a Precipice Blades for my Groudon, so that's pretty much good game. Alright, my opponent is going to lead with Reshiram and Clefable, and I'm going to lead with my Orbeetle and my Whimsicott. I'm pretty sure that the Reshiram is going to pick up the KO onto my Orbeetle with Max Flare, even if I Gigantamax my Orbeetle, so I'm going to have my Whimsicott set up a Tailwind, and I'm going to Gigantamax my Orbeetle and have it use G-Max Gravitas to set up the Gravity for my Groudon, since I know that my opponent has a Landorus-Therian and Rotom-Heat on their team. So setting up the Gravity will make it easier for my Groudon to deal with those Pokemon. The problem is that my opponent has redirection support, so I won't be able to self-activate my Orbeetle's Weakness Policy until the Clefable is gone. My opponent is going to Dynamax the Reshiram, and since the Reshiram has the Life Orb item, there's no way that my Gigantamax Orbeetle will survive a Max Flare from the Reshiram. The Reshiram is actually faster than my Orbeetle, so that means that it will also outspeed my Groudon, so I definitely need to make sure that I maintain speed control by having my Whimsicott use Tailwind. As long as I'm able to set up the Gravity and the Tailwind, my Groudon should be able to knock out all of the opposing Pokemon with Precipice Blades. I just need to watch out for Landorus-Therian potentially switching in to intimidate my Groudon, so I'm going to have to make a prediction in this battle. Clefable is going to use Follow Me, so my Gigantamax Orbeetle's attack is going to get redirected to Clefable. My Whimsicott is able to set up the Tailwind, and my Gigantamax Orbeetle is going to use G-Max Gravitas to set up the Gravity, so now my Groudon will be able to deal damage to my opponent's Flying type Pokemon and Levitating Pokemon with its Ground type attacks. The Reshiram will pick up the KO onto my Gigantamax Orbeetle with a Life Orb boosted Max Flare, but this will let my Groudon come in for free next turn. Max Flare will set up the Sun, which will increase the power of Reshiram's Max Flares, but it shouldn't be too much of a problem to deal with the Reshiram since I have my Choice Banded Groudon, which I'm going to send in next turn. I just need to get some chip damage onto the Dynamax Reshiram to put it in KO range for a Choice Band Precipice Blades from my Groudon. So I'm going to send in my Groudon, and I'm actually going to make a prediction here. I'm going to predict that my opponent will switch out the Clefable and send in Landorus-Therian to intimidate my Groudon. So I'm going to switch out my Groudon and send in Tapu Lele as a sacrifice so that my Groudon can come in next turn. And I don't have to worry about Landorus-Therian intimidating my Groudon anymore since my opponent just switched it in as I predicted. This is a very important turn since if I had my Groudon stay in and go for the Precipice Blades, it would definitely not pick up the KO onto the Dynamax Reshiram at -1 attack, and I would have lost the game. But this play allows me to get some chip damage onto the Dynamax Reshiram so I can put it in KO range for a Choice Banded Precipice Blades from my Groudon. The Reshiram's Life Orb recoil is also going to add up to the chip damage, so that's also important to keep in mind. Now I'm going to send in my Groudon again. I'm going to have my Whimsicott go for a Dazzling Gleam once again, and hopefully that will put it in KO range for a Choice Banded Precipice Blades from my Groudon. My opponent wants to preserve the Landorus-Therian, so they're going to switch out Landorus and send in Clefable. My Whimsicott is going to get some more chip damage onto the Dynamax Reshiram, and that's going to put it into KO range for a Choice Banded Precipice Blades from my Groudon. My Groudon is able to pick up the KO onto both Pokemon, so it's 2v2 now. My opponent has the Landorus-Therian in the back and one other Pokemon that I have not seen yet. I still have 2 more turns of Gravity, so I should be able to win this game with Groudon and Whimsicott. My opponent is going to send in Rotom-Heat and Landorus-Therian, but my Groudon will easily be able to knock out both of the opposing Pokemon with a Choice Banded Precipice Blades. The Intimidate is going to bring my Groudon's attack down to -1 attack, but it doesn't matter since my Groudon is Choice Banded and the Rotom-Heat is 4 times weak to ground type attacks. So this battle showcases how strong Groudon can be after you set up the Gravity. My Groudon is going to pick up the KO onto both of the opposing Pokemon with a Choice Banded Precipice Blades, and that's going to be the end of the game. In this battle, my opponent is going to lead with Yveltal and Landorus-Therian, while I'm going to lead with my Orbeetle and my Whimsicott. The Landorus-Therian is faster than my Orbeetle, so I'll need to have my Whimsicott set up the Tailwind so that my Orbeetle will be able to outspeed the Landorus-Therian. My game plan is to have my Orbeetle go for the G-Max Gravitas to set up the Gravity so that my Groudon can deal damage to both of the opposing Pokemon with Precipice Blades. The Yveltal has the Assault Vest item, so this tells me that the Yveltal cannot use Protect, which is good information for me to keep in mind. The Landorus-Therian has the Choice Scarf item, so my opponent is probably not going to Dynamax Landorus-Therian, so I'm going to Gigantamax my Orbeetle and have my Gigantamax Orbeetle go for the G-Max Gravitas onto the Landorus-Therian to get big damage onto the Landorus-Therian while setting up the Gravity for my Groudon. My Whimsicott is going to set up the Tailwind so that my Gigantamax Orbeetle will be able to move before both of the opposing Pokemon can attack, and the G-Max Gravitas is going to deal a lot of damage to the Landorus-Therian, and G-Max Gravitas is going to set up the Gravity, so we're pretty much good to go. Now my Groudon can use Precipice Blades to deal damage to the Yveltal and the Landorus-Therian, since the Gravity allows you to hit Flying type Pokemon with Ground type moves. The Landorus-Therian is going to go for the U-turn to get some chip damage onto my Whimsicott and switch into Metagross. The Yveltal is going to go for a Snarl to lower the special attack of both of my Pokemon, but actually the Snarl ends up increasing my Orbeetle's special attack since the Snarl is going to activate my Orbeetle's Weakness Policy, increasing its special attack by 2 stages. So now my Orbeetle is at +1 special attack. Now my opponent is going to Dynamax the Metagross, and I had my Gigantamax Orbeetle target the Metagross with a Max Flutterby, since I predicted that my opponent would Dynamax the Metagross. Max Flutterby also decreases Yveltal's special attack, so this is pretty much the most optimal play for me to make in this situation. I need to get as much damage as possible onto the Dynamax Metagross so that my Groudon can finish it off with a Choice Banded Precipice Blades. My Whimsicott is going to get a bit of chip damage onto the Yveltal and the Dynamax Metagross with Dazzling Gleam, and my Gigantamax Orbeetle is going to get some pretty good damage onto the Dynamax Metagross with a Max Flutterby at +1 special attack. The Yveltal is going to go for the foul play onto my Gigantamax Orbeetle since my Orbeetle is at +1 attack, but that's not going to do much damage to my Orbeetle since Orbeetle has a very low physical attack stat. Max Steel Spike will pick up the KO onto my Whimsicott while giving the Dynamax Metagross and the Yveltal a +1 boost to their defense, which will make it more difficult for my Groudon to knock out both of the opposing Pokemon. I'm going to send in my Groudon, and I'm going to predict that my opponent will switch out the Yveltal and send in Landorus-Therian to intimidate my Groudon. So I'm going to double into the Dynamax Metagross with my Gigantamax Orbeetle and my Groudon with Max Flutterby and Precipice Blades. The Intimidate will bring my Groudon down to -1 attack, but Max Flutterby and Precipice Blades will be enough to pick up the KO onto the Dynamax Metagross. Max Flutterby is going to put the Dynamax Metagross into KO range for a Choice Banded Precipice Blades from my Groudon, and the Landorus-Therian is also in KO range for a Precipice Blades from my Groudon. So my Groudon will be able to pick up the KOs onto both of the opposing Pokemon. So it's 3v2 now. My opponent has the Yveltal and another Pokemon in the back. my Orbeeto's Gigantamax turns will end, and I only have 2 more turns of Gravity. Since I know that the Yveltal cannot use Protect, I can easily target the Yveltal and have my Orbeetle put it to sleep with a Hypnosis. Hypnosis is 100% accurate thanks to the Gravity, so my plan right now is to put both of the opposing Pokemon to sleep with Hypnosis, and keep on getting chip damage with Precipice Blades onto both of the opposing Pokemon. I still have my Tapu Lele in the back, so Tapu Lele can easily finish off both of the opposing Pokemon with super effective Moonblast. The Yveltal is going to try to target my Orbeetle with a Sucker Punch, but I'm not going to fall for that since I'm the Dark Master, and I'm not going to lose to random Sucker Punches from Dark-type Pokemon. My Orbeetle is going to put the Yveltal to sleep with Hypnosis, which will make it easier for my Pokemon to deal with the Yveltal. My Groudon is going to get some chip damage onto both of the opposing Pokemon with Precipice Blades. It's not going to deal too much damage since my Groudon is at -1 attack and the Grimmsnarl has set up the Reflect. And my opponent thinks that they can get me with the Sucker Punch from the Grimmsnarl, but nope, I'm not going to fall for that. My Orbeetle is going to put that Grimmsnarl to sleep with Hypnosis, and my Groudon is going to get some more chip damage with Precipice Blades. And there's not much my opponent can do now since both of their Pokemon are sleeping. So next turn I was going to go for the Baton Pass play to give my Tapu Lele a +1 boost to its special attack, but my opponent is going to forfeit the battle. And here's the final battle of this video. My opponent is going to lead with Grimmsnarl and Dialga, while I'm going to lead with my Orbeetle and my Tapu Lele. My Tapu Lele's ability Psychic Surge will set up the Psychic Terrain, which will protect both of my Pokemon from any prankster shenanigans from the opposing Grimmsnarl. My Orbeetle's Frisk ability will reveal that the Grimmsnarl has the Light Clay and the Dialga has the Weakness Policy, so I'll need to be careful and make sure that I do not activate Dialga's Weakness Policy. So I'm going to Gigantamax my Orbeetle right away, and I'm going to have my Tapu Lele use Fling onto my Orbeetle to activate my Orbeetle's Weakness Policy, and I'm going to have my Orbeetle target the Grimmsnarl with Max Flutterby, which will decrease the Dialga's special attack by 1 stage. So my game plan was to decrease the damage output of Dialga's special attacks as much as possible while knocking out the other Pokemon, since I was expecting my opponent to Dynamax the Dialga right away, but they actually decided not to Dynamax the Dialga this turn. The Grimmsnarl is going to set up a Light Screen which will allow it to survive the Max Flutterby for my Gigantamax Orbeetle. My Tapu Lele is going to fling the Pataya Berry at my Orbeetle to give it a +1 boost to its special attack and activate my Orbeetle's Weakness Policy, bringing my Orbeetle up to +3 special attack. And my Orbeetle is also going to get a +2 boost to its physical attack, which will come into play later on in this battle. So the Grimmsnarl is going to survive the Max Flutterby at +3 special attack for my Orbeetle since the Grimmsnarl set up the Light Screen, but it's going to get that -1 special attack drop onto the Dialga. Dialga is going to go for the Flash Cannon onto my Tapu Lele, but my Tapu Lele is going to survive the attack thanks to the -1 drop in special attack from the Max Flutterby. My opponent is going to switch out the Grimmsnarl and send in Dusclops, expecting my Gigantamax Orbeetle to target the Grimmsnarl slot with another Max Flutterby, but this time I decide to double into the Dialga since I want to start getting some damage onto the Dialga. My opponent is going to Dynamax the Dialga, which was a good decision, because if they had not Dynamaxed the Dialga would be taking a lot of damage from my Pokemon. So now this Dialga is going to be more difficult to knock out, and I kind of needed to get some chip damage onto the Dusclops, but I wasn't expecting my opponent to switch out the Grimmsnarl and send in Dusclops this turn. My Tapu Lele and my Gigantamax Orbeetle are going to get a bit of damage onto the Dynamax Dialga, but the Dynamax Dialga is taking the hits very well since my opponent has the Light Screen in effect. And Dialga is going to finish off my Tapu Lele with a Max Quake, which will give the Dynamax Dialga and the Dusclops a +1 boost to their special defense. So I definitely need to send in my Groudon next turn since the Light Screen and the +1 in special defense are going to make it harder to knock out the opposing Pokemon with special attacks. I'm going to send in my Groudon, and I'm going to double into the Dusclops slot and try to pick up the KO onto the Dusclops, but I'm pretty sure the Dusclops will survive the attacks since the Dusclops is at +1 special defense and the Light Screen is still in effect. My Gigantamax Orbeetle is going to deal slightly less than 50% damage to the Dusclops, so that was a very smart play by my opponent to switch into Dusclops and go for the Max Quake last turn. My Groudon is going to pick up the KO onto the Dynamax Dialga with a Choice Banded Precipice Blades, but the Dusclops barely survives the Precipice Blades from my Groudon and is able to set up the Trick Room. My opponent is going to send in the Grimmsnarl, and that's going to be the end of my Orbeetle's Gigantamax turns. I still have 3 more turns of Gravity, so it's time to put some Pokemon to sleep with Hypnosis. I'm going to switch out my Groudon since I'm expecting the Dusclops to go for the Will-O-Wisp into my Groudon, but the Dusclops actually goes for a Pain Split instead, so I guess it does not have Will-O-Wisp. The Reflect is going to reduce the damage output of my Groudon's physical attacks, but I have a plan that's really going to surprise my opponent. So first, I'm going to have my Orbeetle put the Dusclops to sleep with a Hypnosis, since Dusclops is a very annoying Pokemon to deal with. The Grimmsnarl is going to try to go for the taunt, but that's not going to work since the Psychic Terrain is still in effect. And now I'm going to make a very epic play, and I'm going to have my Orbeetle go for the Baton Pass to pass its stat changes to my Groudon. So now my Groudon is going to be a +2 attack, since my Orbeetle got a +2 attack boost from the Weakness Policy, which my Orbeetle passed to my Groudon with the Baton Pass. So now my Groudon is pretty much going to destroy all of the opposing Pokemon with Choice Banded Precipice Blades at +2 attack. I'm going to have my Whimsicott set up a Tailwind in case my opponent's last Pokemon is faster than Groudon. The Grimmsnarl is going to go for the taunt onto my Whimsicott, but it's too late for that since my Whimsicott already did its job with setting up the Tailwind. And now my Groudon is going to pick up the KO onto both of the opposing Pokemon with a Choice Banded Precipice Blades at +2 attack. So it doesn't even matter that my opponent set up the Reflect since my Groudon is just too powerful with that +2 boost in attack. The Gravity has ended, so hopefully my Groudon will connect with the Precipice Blades this turn, and my opponent's last Pokemon is Milotic. So this should be an easy KO for my Groudon. My Whimsicott is going to get some chip damage with Dazzling Gleam, and my Groudon is going to destroy this Milotic with a single target Choice Banded Precipice Blades at +2 attack, and that is pretty much good game. Here's the Pokepaste for my team. I also put the link to the Pokepaste in the description for this video. Now I'm going to give you guys a full team summary and analysis of this team. Overall, this team can deal with the most popular threats in the metagame for Series 8. Groudon beats Incineroar, Regieleki, and Zacian. Glastrier beats Landorus-Therian, Whimsicott, Venusaur, Thundurus, and Rillaboom. Whimsicott beats Urshifu. Tapu Lele beats Grimmsnarl, and the Psychic Terrain protects Tapu Lele from any prankster shenanigans from Grimmsnarl. Venusaur has good synergy with Groudon. Groudon's draw ability sets up the sun, and Venusaur has the Chlorophyll ability which doubles its speed while the sun weather is in effect. Also, Venusaur has Weather Ball to deal with opposing Venusaurs, Zacian, Kartana, and Rillaboom. Weather Ball changes type depending on the weather, so Weather Ball becomes a fire type attack while the sun weather is in effect. Orbeetle can also beat Venusaur and Rillaboom, but it needs to watch out for the Sleep Powders and Weather Balls from Venusaur. This is a Gigantamax Orbeetle which can use G-Max Gravitas to set up the Gravity, and this will make it easier for Groudon to deal with Flying type Pokemon and Pokemon with the Levitate ability, since they will no longer be immune to Ground type attacks while the Gravity is in effect. And Groudon can deal big damage to those Pokemon with Choice Banded Precipice Blades or high horsepower. So now let's talk more about how Gravity works. G-Max Gravitas causes the field to undergo intense gravity, and this effect lasts for 5 turns. The intense gravity causes all Pokemon on the field to become grounded. Grounded Pokemon lose their immunity to ground type moves due to their flying type, levitate ability, effects of magnet rise, or their held air balloon. During intense gravity, all Pokemon have their accuracy stat multiplied by 5/3. For example, let's consider the move Hypnosis, which has 60 accuracy. Basically, you multiply 60 times 5, which is 300, and then you divide 300 by 3, which is 100. So Hypnosis has 100 accuracy during the intense gravity. So as you can see, all moves with at least 60 accuracy will become 100% accurate during the intense gravity. And this makes Hypnosis a very reliable move to use while the intense gravity is in effect. So the main strategy of this team is to activate Orbeetle's Weakness Policy and to have Orbeetle use G-Max Gravitas to set up the intense gravity so that all Pokemon on the field will become grounded. And Groudon will be able to deal damage to Pokemon like Landorus-Therian and Rotom-Wash with Precipice Blades. Also, Pokemon like Rotom-Wash and Thundurus will actually take super effective damage from Precipice Blades while the intense gravity is in effect, since without the ground type immunity, they are weak to ground type attacks. Venusaur has the move Earth Power, and Glastrier has the move High Horsepower, which you can also take advantage of while the intense gravity is in effect. Whimsicott can set up Tailwind so that Orbeetle will be able to outspeed any Pokemon that are faster than it, and Whimsicott can activate Orbeetle's weakness policy with U-turn. And you should have Orbeetle get rid of any Pokemon that threaten Groudon, and make sure to have Orbeetle use G-Max Gravitas to make it easier for Groudon to get rid of the Pokemon that Orbeetle struggles with. The EVs in speed for Orbeetle and Groudon guarantee that they will be able to outspeed max speed Regieleki after you set up the Tailwind. Tapu Lele has the timid nature with maximum speed investment, so after you set up the Tailwind, Tapu Lele will be able to outspeed Venusaur in the sun and pick up the KO onto Venusaur with a super effective Psychic boosted by the Psychic Terrain. If the opposing Pokemon are slower than Orbeetle, then you can lead with Tapu Lele and Orbeetle and have Tapu Lele use Fling on Orbeetle to activate Orbeetle's weakness policy. Also, Whimsicott has the option of setting up the Trick Room to counter opposing Tailwind teams, and Glastrier does very well under Trick Room since Glastrier is a very slow Pokemon. Now I'm going to talk about leads and the strategies for each lead. The first lead that I'm going to talk about is the Orbeetle and Tapu Lele lead. You should lead with Orbeetle and Tapu Lele if the opposing Pokemon are slower than Orbeetle. You should have Tapu Lele use Fling on Orbeetle to activate Orbeetle's weakness policy, and this will bring Orbeetle up to +3 special attack. When Tapu Lele flings the Pitaya Berry at Orbeetle, Orbeetle will get a +1 boost to its special attack from the Pitaya Berry, and since Fling is a Dark type attack, and since Orbeetle is weak to Dark type attacks, it will activate Orbeetle's weakness policy, giving it a +2 boost to its special attack, so it will be a +3 special attack. Tapu Lele's Psychic Surge ability sets up the Psychic Terrain, which increases the power of Psychic type attacks by 30%, and Orbeetle has the move Expanding Force, which becomes a spread move in the Psychic Terrain. Expanding Force at +3 special attack will deal massive damage to the opposing Pokemon, so it's definitely a strong option to consider. The Psychic Terrain also protects Tapu Lele and Orbeetle from priority attacks such as Fake Out, Sucker Punch, and Prankster priority moves, which is very important considering that Incineroar and Grimmsnarl are very popular Pokemon in this format. Tapu Lele also has the option of going for Taunt to prevent an opposing Pokemon from setting up Trick Room. The next lead that I'm going to talk about is the Orbeetle and Whimsicott lead. You should lead with Orbeetle and Whimsicott if the opposing Pokemon are faster than Orbeetle. First, you should have Whimsicott use Tailwind so that Orbeetle will be able to outspeed Pokemon that are faster than it. Then on the next turn, you should have Whimsicott use U-turn on Orbeetle to activate Orbeetle's weakness policy, giving Orbeetle a +2 boost to its special attack. U-turn also lets Whimsicott switch out for another Pokemon, which is very ideal since this allows you to activate the weakness policy while switching into Groudon. And you can have Orbeetle go for the G-Max Gravitas while having Groudon on the field ready to deal big damage to the opposing Pokemon with Precipice Blades. You can also switch into Tapu Lele to set up the Psychic Terrain, which will increase the damage output of G-Max Gravitas. The next lead that I'm going to talk about is the Orbeetle and Groudon lead. This lead is very straightforward. Just Dynamax Orbeetle and have it go for the G-Max Gravitas to set up the Gravity, and pretty much sweep with Choice Band Precipice Blades from Groudon. This only works if your opponent's Pokemon are all slower than Orbeetle and Groudon, and if your opponent's Pokemon are all weak to ground type attacks after being grounded from the intense gravity effect. So basically you'll want Groudon to pick up KOs as quickly as possible with Precipice Blades. Also, Orbeetle has 1 extra point in speed so that it will always move before Groudon. The next lead that I'm going to talk about is the Whimsicott and Tapu Lele lead. Tapu Lele's Psychic Surge ability provides Whimsicott with Psychic Terrain support, which protects both Pokemon from priority attacks, so they will be protected from any potential Fake-Outs from Pokemon like Incineroar and Grimmsnarl. Basically, you should have Whimsicott set up Tailwind to maintain speed control and have Tapu Lele use Taunt to deny any potential Trick Rooms from the opposing Pokemon. And the Psychic Terrain guarantees that you'll be able to set up Tailwind while being able to taunt any potential Trick Room users. Also, after you set up the Tailwind, Tapu Lele will outspeed Venusaur in the sun, and Tapu Lele can pick up the KO onto Venusaur with a super effective Psychic boosted by the Psychic Terrain. Just be careful if your opponent has Rillaboom on their team, since Rillaboom is slower than Tapu Lele, and if your opponent leads with Rillaboom while you lead with Tapu Lele, Rillaboom will win the terrain war, and it will be able to go for the Fake Out onto Whimsicott or Tapu Lele to deny Tailwind or Taunt respectively. If your opponent has Rillaboom on their team, you might want to lead with Orbeetle or Venusaur, and if your opponent leads with Rillaboom, then you can have one of your Pokemon switch out into Tapu Lele to deny the potential Fake Out. The next lead that I'm going to talk about is the Whimsicott and Glastrier lead. This is basically your Trick Room mode. Whimsicott has the Focus Sash, so you'll be guaranteed to get the Trick Room up as long as your opponent doesn't double into Whimsicott. If it is more beneficial to set up the Tailwind for Glastrier, you have that option as well. Just be careful if your opponent has any Fake Out users or Taunt users, since those Pokemon can stop Whimsicott from setting up Trick Room or Tailwind. It's a good idea to have Tapu Lele in the back in case you need to switch it in to deny a potential Fake Out or Prankster taunts from Prankster Pokemon like Whimsicott and Grimmsnarl. If you need to protect Glastrier while setting up the Trick Room, you can Dynamax Glastrier and have it go for the Max Guard. The final lead that I'm going to talk about is the Groudon and Venusaur lead. This is your Sun mode. Groudon sets up the Sun for Venusaur. Venusaur gets its speed doubled since it has the Chlorophyll ability, and Venusaur in the Sun outspeeds every Pokemon in the metagame. It's a very straightforward lead. You'll want to play very aggressively with this lead and try to pick up KOs as quickly as possible. This is a Gigantamax Venusaur, so it can use G-Max Vine Lash. Most of the time you'll want to Dynamax Venusaur and have it go for the G-Max Vine Lash to get that G-Max Vine Lash residual damage for 4 turns. Venusaur has Weather Ball, which will deal massive damage to Zacian Crown Sword as well as opposing Venusaurs, since Weather Ball becomes a Fire type move while the Sun Weather is in effect, and Weather Ball becomes Max Flare when you Dynamax Venusaur. Groudon can beat the Fire type Pokemon that threaten Venusaur, while Venusaur can beat the Grass and Water type Pokemon that threaten Groudon, and Venusaur can also use Weather Ball to beat the Ice type Pokemon that threaten both Groudon and Venusaur. Now I'm going to talk about each individual Pokemon as well as their held items, EV spreads, and moves. First, let's talk about Orbeetle. This is a Gigantamax Orbeetle, so when you Dynamax Orbeetle, its Psychic type attacks will turn into G-Max Gravitas. G-Max Gravitas causes the field to undergo intense gravity, and this effect lasts for 5 turns. Orbeetle is the star of the show, and the goal is to proc Orbeetle's weakness policy and sweep your opponent's team with Orbeetle, but in situations where that is not possible, Orbeetle can use G-Max Gravitas to set up the gravity so that you can sweep your opponent's team with Groudon. Orbeetle is a bug and psychic type Pokemon, so you don't need to take super effective damage from a fire, flying, bug, rock, ghost, or dark type attack in order for the weakness policy to get activated. This team has 2 ways to self-activate the weakness policy. The first way is to have Tapu Lele use Fling on Orbeetle, and the second way is to have Whimsicott use U-Turn on Orbeetle. Orbeetle has the ability Frisk, which reveals the held items of the opposing Pokemon when you first send out Orbeetle into battle. As for the EV spread, 236 EVs in speed allows Orbeetle to outspeed Regieleki after you set up the Tailwind. I gave Orbeetle an extra point in speed so that it will always move before Groudon, so if Orbeetle and Groudon are both on the field, Orbeetle will be able to use G-Max Gravitas to set up the gravity before Groudon attacks with Precipice Blades. The 252 EVs in special attack along with the modest nature allows Orbeetle to have maximum damage output with its special attacks, and the remaining 20 EVs go into HP to give Orbeetle some bulk. As for Orbeetle's moves, Bug Buzz and Expanding Force are the most optimal attacking moves for Orbeetle. Bug Buzz allows Orbeetle to deal super effective damage to Dark and Psychic type Pokemon, and Expanding Force allows Orbeetle to at least get neutral damage on almost everything else except Steel type Pokemon, which resists both of Orbeetle's attacks. But that's what we have Groudon for, since Groudon can deal massive damage to Steel type Pokemon with Choice Banded Precipice Blades and high horsepower. Expanding Force becomes a spread move and increases in power when the Psychic Terrain is in effect, and we have Tapu Lele on the team which can activate the Psychic Terrain with its Psychic Surge ability, so Expanding Force is the most optimal Psychic type attack for Orbeetle. And of course when you Dynamax Orbeetle, Expanding Force becomes G-Max Gravitas, which you can use to set up the gravity. Hypnosis becomes 100% accurate while the intense gravity is in effect, so Hypnosis is a very optimal move to include in the gravity strategy. Sleep is a very useful status effect since it gives you at least 1 turn to set up or reposition your Pokemon while the opposing Pokemon are asleep. And finally, Baton Pass lets you pass off Orbeetle's stat changes to another Pokemon in the party. For example, you can pass off the +2 attack boost that Orbeetle gets from the weakness policy to Groudon or Glastrier by using Baton Pass, or you can pass off the +2 special attack boost to Tapu Lele, Venusaur, or Whimsicott. Now let's talk about Tapu Lele. Tapu Lele has the Pitaya Berry item so that it can use Fling to fling the Pitaya Berry at Orbeetle to activate Orbeetle's weakness policy, but the +1 boost in special attack from the Pitaya Berry also benefits Tapu Lele since Tapu Lele itself is a special sweeper. Tapu Lele's ability Psychic Surge activates the Psychic Terrain when you send out Tapu Lele into battle, so Tapu Lele has very good synergy with Orbeetle, which has the move Expanding Force. The Psychic Terrain will boost the power of Psychic type attacks, and the Psychic Terrain protects Tapu Lele from priority attacks. The EV spread is very simple. This is a max speed and max special attack Tapu Lele with a timid nature, and the remaining 4 EVs in HP give it 1 point in HP. As for Tapu Lele's moves, Tapu Lele will be using Fling to fling its Pataya Berry at Orbeetle to activate Orbeetle's weakness policy. Psychic and Moonblast are Tapu Lele's strongest options for single target attacks, and both moves get the same type attack bonus since Tapu Lele is a Psychic and Berry type Pokemon. Tapu Lele can use Taunt on Trick Room setters to deny a potential Trick Room, and it's also useful in shutting down support Pokemon such as Clefairy. Now let's talk about Whimsicott. This is pretty much the exact same Whimsicott from the Weakness Policy Corviknight team. The only difference is that it has U-turn instead of Helping Hand. Focus Sash allows Whimsicott to survive at least one attack so that it can at least set up a Tailwind before fainting. If it manages to survive after you set up the Tailwind, then on the next turn you can have Whimsicott go for the U-turn into Orbeetle to activate Orbeetle's Weakness Policy, while Whimsicott switches out, allowing you to send in another Pokemon. This is also very useful since you get to preserve Whimsicott so that it can set up another Tailwind later on in the battle. Dazzling Gleam is Whimsicott's attacking move, and Trick Room is useful if your opponent is also using Tailwind. If you think your opponent is going to set up a Tailwind, you can have Whimsicott set up the Trick Room and you'll have a huge advantage over your opponent. Also, Glastrier does very well under Trick Room, so that's another reason to have Trick Room on Whimsicott. The Prankster ability increases the speed priority of Whimsicott's status category moves by 1, so Tailwind will get +1 priority thanks to Whimsicott's Prankster ability. This is very useful since very often your opponent will double into Whimsicott to try to knock it out before it can set up a Tailwind. Now let's talk about Groudon. Groudon is a very important Pokemon on this team because Groudon will benefit from the intense gravity effect from G-Max Gravitas. Groudon has the Choice Band item so that it can deal massive damage to the opposing Pokemon with Precipice Blades and high horsepower. After Orbeetle uses G-Max Gravitas to set up the gravity effect, Groudon will be using Precipice Blades most of the time anyways, so Choice Band is the best item for Groudon for the gravity strategy. Groudon's Drought ability reduces the damage taken from water type attacks by 50%, so this ability benefits Groudon since Groudon is weak to water type attacks. The Drought ability also increases the damage output of fire type attacks by 50%, so Fire Punch gets a 50% power boost from the Sun. As for the EV spread, 228 EVs in speed allows Groudon to outspeed Regieleki after you set up the Tailwind. I decided to give Groudon 108 EVs in attack, and I put the rest of the EVs into HP since I figured 108 EVs was good enough for Groudon to deal big damage with its physical attacks. And I wanted to give Groudon some extra bulk in HP so that it can survive longer. And of course, Adamant Nature is the ideal nature for Groudon. As for Groudon's moves, Precipice Blades is pretty much the only move that Groudon will be using in most games. As I mentioned before, you should have Orbeetle use G-Max Gravitas to set up the gravity effect so that Groudon can use Precipice Blades to deal damage to flying type Pokemon and Pokemon with the Levitate ability. Precipice Blades is a spread move, so it cannot be redirected with moves like Follow Me since it deals damage to both of the opposing Pokemon. But there are some Pokemon that have access to the move Wide Guard, and that's why Groudon has high horsepower. High horsepower is a single target ground type attack, and it's a useful option when you need to play around potential Wide Guard users. Rock Slide allows Groudon to deal super effective damage to flying and bug type Pokemon. Fire Punch allows Groudon to deal super effective damage to grass and bug type Pokemon. And Fire Punch has very good synergy with Groudon's Drought ability since Fire Punch gets a 50% power boost while the Sun Weather is in effect. Now let's talk about Venusaur. This is pretty much the exact same Venusaur from the Weakness Policy Greedent team. The only difference is that it has Weather Ball instead of Sludge Bomb. Life Orb increases the damage output of Venusaur's moves by 30%. The Chlorophyll ability doubles Venusaur's speed while the Sun Weather is in effect, so Venusaur has very good synergy with Groudon, which sets up the Sun with its Drought ability. This is a Gigantamax Venusaur, so Frenzy Plant becomes G-Max Vine Lash when you Dynamax Venusaur, and you'll get that G-Max Vine Lash residual damage for 4 turns. And G-Max Vine Lash will get 150 base power from Frenzy Plant. Sleep Powder allows Venusaur to put an opposing Pokemon to sleep. Earth Power allows Venusaur to get super effective damage on Incineroar, Regieleki, and Zacian Crown Sword. Weather Ball changes type depending on the weather, so Weather Ball becomes a Fire type attack while the Sun Weather is in effect. Fire type Weather Ball allows Venusaur to get super effective damage onto opposing Venusaur, Zacian Crown Sword, Rillaboom, and Whimsicott. When you Dynamax Venusaur, if the Sun Weather is in effect, then Weather Ball will become Max Flare since the max move for Weather Ball also changes type depending on the weather. Also, most Zacians can easily survive Max Quake from Venusaur even with the Life Orb boost, but Max Flare from Venusaur will be able to pick up the KO onto Max HP Zacian since Max Flare gets the additional 50% power boost from the Sun, and Venusaur gets the 30% power boost from the Life Orb as well. Finally, let's talk about Glastrier. Lumberry is a very good item for Glastrier since Venusaur is a very popular Pokemon in this format, and it covers for Venusaur going for Sleep Powder onto Glastrier. Glastrier will eat his Lumberry and can pick up the KO onto Venusaur with a super effective Icicle Crash or Max Hailstorm. Lumberry also covers for potential Will-O-Wisp users. Glastrier's ability Chilling Neigh is a very good ability. Every time Glastrier knocks out a Pokemon, Glastrier's Chilling Neigh ability will activate, giving Glastrier a +1 boost to its attack. And Glastrier can quickly sweep through teams as it continues to pick up KOs while the Chilling Neigh ability increases Glastrier's attack with each Pokemon it knocks out. As for the EV spread, 252 EVs in HP and 68 EVs in special defense allows Dynamax Glastrier to survive, +2 G-Max Vocalift from Gigantamax Colossal. And most Gigantamax Colossals are special sweepers. I put 116 EVs in attack since that's good enough for Glastrier to deal big damage with its physical attacks, and it has the adamant nature anyways. The 12 EVs in speed gives Glastrier 2 points in speed so that it can outspeed opposing Glastriers. Most people would give it 1 point in speed, so I'm giving it 2 points in speed. And the remaining 60 EVs go into defense. As for Glastrier's moves, Swords Dance gives Glastrier a +2 boost to its attack. It's very important for Glastrier to have another way to boost its attack, since Incineroar and Landorus-Therian are very popular Pokemon in Series 8. Intimidate makes it more difficult for Glastrier to pick up KOs, so it's not wise to depend only on the Chilling Neigh ability to get attack boosts. Icicle Crash gets the same type attack bonus, and Icicle Crash becomes Max Hailstorm when you Dynamax Glastrier. Max Hailstorm is very useful in picking up KOs since it covers for potential Focus Sashes. If an opposing Pokemon survives Max Hailstorm because it has the Focus Sash item, then the chip damage from the Hailstorm will finish off that Pokemon, unless the opposing Pokemon is an Ice-type Pokemon. High horsepower allows Glastrier to get super effective damage onto Incineroar and Zacian Crown Sword. Max Quake is useful in boosting Glastrier's special defense and makes it more difficult for the opposing Pokemon to knock it out with special attacks. Close Combat allows Glastrier to get super effective damage onto Urshifu Single Strike, which is the Dark Urshifu. And when you Dynamax Glastrier, Close Combat becomes Max Knuckle, which gives Glastrier a +1 boost to its attack. So as you can see, Glastrier has 3 ways to boost its attack. Glastrier can boost its attack with the Chilling Neigh ability, Swords Dance, and Max Knuckle. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.